Asgard's Wrath 2 has taken its rightful place as one of the best games of 2023. The game is massive, with well over 60 hours of storyline and content to dig into, and with that said, there will be plenty of tips to share about the game. In a previous video, I covered a lot of tips for beginners, so in this video, I'll be covering tips for people who are sticking to playing the game every day and would like some nice shortcuts to getting through the storyline and some combat situations a little more smoothly. In addition, also I'll be making a few corrections to my previous tips video and answering some of your guys' questions at the end. Don't forget that this content is brought to you guys by VR Wave, channel members, and Patreon supporters. Now with all that out of the way, let's dig into these hardcore tips for Asgard's Wrath 2. So first off, let me make a few corrections to my previous video. In that video, I did state that I could not get the axe to equip to my back. Now this is actually vital for one of my tips here in this video later down the road, so stick around for that. But let me go ahead and say that you can actually equip that axe to your back shoulder slots. I was just experiencing some sort of weird glitch not allowing me to do it, but let me correct this and say that you can actually do that. And while we're on the subject of the axe, I did see that a lot of people got a little confused with my point about the axe being the best weapon in the game. That's simply due to the utility of the axe, not the overall damage output that the axe can do. Now you can do a lot of things to subsidize that damage output by upgrading a lot of the abilities of the axe, but my main point with why you should go with upgrading the axe over the sword or the shield, etc. is just due to the sheer overwhelming amount of options that you have with this thing. It can be close range, it can be far range, and it has much more range than any other weapon in the game that I've played with so far. Let me know what you think about the axe or the sword whip in the comments below. And finally, I did note that the Rift mode is not an online only type of mode, it's just another way to play the game. The only online parts of this game that are actually affected by being online are the cosmic events, which is an online feature that allows you to claim your loot and see other ghosts as you play the game from other players. If you guys want more information about the rifts, let me know in the comments below because I will be making a rift tips video later down the road. Now let's dig into the tips for all of you hardcore Asgard's Wrath 2 players out there. Starting off with number 1, dual wield swords for double damage. You'll get bonus damage if you pre-order your game, as it'll give you another sword to deal this damage with. You can equip 2 swords at a time by using this pre-order bonus. The sword deals significantly more damage than the axe, so equipping 2 of them will deal a lot more damage, but this means that you'll have to put the axe on your back or something like that in order to keep it out of the way, but still have it handy for solving puzzles. Thank you, Maximus, for letting us know about the dual wielding capabilities. Number 2, throw low and target low. Now I've noticed this mainly with the axe, but you're going to want to throw right below where you think you should be throwing. I don't know why the game's targeting system is exactly like this, but for the most part I've been noticing that if as long as I throw not exactly where I'm trying to throw out, I throw it just a little bit lower, put a little bit of a flick on the throw, I always get exactly what I'm trying to throw at. Now this is with the exception of enemies. Throwing directly at enemies seems to work just fine, but let's say you're trying to pick up some items or there's just something you can't reach and you're trying to throw your axe in order to get it. Maybe you're using the axe hover ability to target it in midair and pick it up, which is its own thing, but for the most part I'm going to say you should throw your axe low whenever you are looking directly at your target, as long as it's not an enemy. Number 3, drop grip to fall, and you can do this on ropes and ladders. Now what I mean by this is kind of doing a spelunking maneuver. So in the game, whenever you fall or drop from very large heights, you don't necessarily take a lot of damage or anything like that, but it does force you to restart that little section or that little moment over, and will not allow you to complete it until you go through the grueling process of climbing down hand over hand on a rope or ladder or something like that. There are areas in the game where just gripping the posts will drop you all the way down, but there are plenty of areas where the game absolutely wants you to climb all the way down an area area. If you would like to make this go much quicker, you can basically just grab onto the rope, chain, and or ladder and let go of it while hovering your hand over that object, occasionally gripping on your way down in order to slow your descent but increase your climbing speed. Now this works really well for if you're dropping below booby traps. Sometimes there's spikes on the walls and you just want to let go of the rope and drop right past it and grab the rope again, and then continue doing that until you're at the bottom. This is a much faster way of climbing, especially if you're just descending. Number 4, you can rotate the axe in mid-air with your wrist. Now most of you guys know by this point that you can actually control the axe mid-air by throwing it, pressing the trigger button and holding it, and then redirecting it by moving your wrist about. But did you know that you could throw it directly in front of you, have it hover, and you can actually watch it change the angle of the axe based off of how your wrist is positioned? This is important to know because if you want to get good at throwing and targeting with this thing, which I have done by the way, you'll need to know the orientation of your wrist whenever you're slinging it side to side. Once you master this skill, you'll be able to use the axe in just about every situation that this game has to offer, and honestly, it's still one of the best weapons in my opinion. Number 5, swing your sword whip wide and low with the upgrade that gives it 3 strikes. Now the sword whip is a cool weapon, but it's more of a mid-range weapon. It can kind of be like floppy and doesn't really swing exactly at what I'm trying to hit all the time. In fact, swinging overhead with the sword whip, which you would think would be the most accurate way to swing one of these things, is actually just got it going all over the place. So I found swinging it side to side a little lower actually hits a lot of enemies at once. It allows me to pull towards an enemy whenever I actually decide to swing towards them instead of constantly pulling me towards enemies when I don't want to get close just yet. In addition, once you upgrade the sword whip to have the 3 little strikes whenever you're swinging it side to side or up and down, it actually widens or broadens the actual hitbox range for this weapon. So what you're going to do with this is swing it side to side. It's going to actually kind of envelop you in somewhat of an AoE type of situation for enemies to walk straight up close to you and right into all of your chain whipping. Number 6, when you run into higher level enemies, remember to switch out your relics to gain elemental advantages. Now this is kind of mute whenever you're talking about the physical relics, but at this point in the game, if you're a hardcore player, you should have collected plenty of elemental relics. Now you might still be encountering areas where you're getting your ass handed to you by some lizard dudes with some elemental rings around their wrist or something of that nature. Now if this is happening to you and you are fighting enemies in an area with higher levels, double check to make sure that they don't have some sort of signifier on them that shows you what attribute that they are using. You can then just use the corresponding weakness to that attribute, go straight into your pause menu, just switch out your relics real quick to what gives you the actual advantage, even just for that moment, just for that time, just for those enemies, and then switch back to the equipment you're used to if you'd like. This will always give you the advantage and keep really good relics from just sitting in your inventory and never getting used, and honestly, it's a great way to use all of the different items. Now I've been told you can't remove relics from weapons once you place them in, but I've absolutely been able to do this in my version of the game. Number 7, sword whip is the absolute best item at collecting other items. And what I mean by this is you have the ability to go pick items up. You have a tiny bit of telekinesis when it comes to picking items up, but for the most part I've seen a lot of people throwing the axe in order to collect items, and even in my previous video I said it was a good idea in tight spaces to throw the axe and kind of sling it around the room to collect all the items in the room. But once you acquire the sword whip, you can actually kind of do the same side to side swinging motion that I was talking about previously to walk up to any group of boxes, bushes, etc., even a bunch of dead enemies, and just kind of swing it side to side, and it will actually just scoop everything up pretty easily, making it the absolute best way to pick up and gather items quickly. The sword whip is not just an awesome weapon, it can be a handy tool as well. Number 8, thank you to Declan Smith 6295 for this one. Don't waste skill points on finishers for followers because they they are rare. Not the skill points, but the finishers. Basically, what I think he's trying to say here is if you dump skill points into those finisher moves for your followers, it's just not going to pay off very often because they're not going to be happening as often as you need them to. It's probably best to dump those skill points into other things. Speaking of which, number 9, focus on HP, attack, and armor upgrades when it comes to followers. Now, this is my own personal advice for these guys after having a few followers in my party, but what I would say after increasing their friendship levels, working on different stat abilities, working on armor sets, working on, those extra things you get from the friendship, I'd say honestly the HP, the attack stats, and the armor stats are all the absolute best things to be focused on here. They make the followers a little more useful rather than dying all the time. That's got to be one of the most frustrating things when it comes to some of the followers, is when you get into a higher level area and you could actually use their help, they just keep dying on you, and that can get quite irritating. To counter this, increasing their HP will keep them from dying, increasing their attack and their attack based stats will help them get rid of enemies and swarms a lot quicker, and their armor stat of course goes hand in hand with that HP stat, increasing their longevity. Now, I shouldn't have to say much for why having a strong follower is helpful, but it will get you through some of the tougher parts of the game when you are swarmed with many types of enemies. Number 10, rapid throwing. If you equip the axe to your back right shoulder and or your left shoulder, I suppose if your left hand is your dominant, but if your right hand's your dominant, equip that thing to your right shoulder. As in my previous video, I did say to equip your axe to your dominant hand on the dominant hip, allowing you to have quick access to it. Now, while this was true, there is a faster method, which is just equipping it to your shoulder, allowing you to basically draw from your shoulder, throw and let go, and because the axe kind of will automatically reload onto your shoulder, you can just do this in very quick succession. This makes it to where even with the upgrades that you pay for the axe and the skill points abilities, you won't actually need all of them. What I mean by this is you won't have to actually stop the axe in mid-air and start slinging it around in certain areas. In some areas where you're swarmed with a lot of enemies very quickly, you can actually just start hurling that axe off your shoulder very quickly, dealing a lot of damage while protecting yourself with the sword whip in the left hand. And this works hand in hand because while you're throwing that sword axe over your shoulder, the sword whip is protecting you with those low, wide swings. Now, I found this to be a pretty sturdy method of getting through crowds and swarms of enemies in this game. Let me know your guys' comments, tips, and anything I may have gotten wrong in this video in the comments below. Now, before we move on to the Q&A part of the video where I answer a few of your guys' questions from my previous video about Asgard's Wrath 2, let me thank my sponsor real quick, VR Wave. VR Wave will provide you guys with a custom prescription lens for your VR headsets, and yes, they do have them for the Quest 3 right now, and these things can address blue light sensitivity and astigmatism. VR Wave has been a long-time sponsor because their product is one of the best upgrades you can make for your VR headset, guys. If you have any visual trouble, you should definitely check them out. Use my code Red Devil Studios to get 5% off your total order. Thank you so much. Now let's get right back into the video. Question from @RightfulKingBob. How do you get better whetstones? And we had another commenter answer this one @Zeph834 said from the main story quest. So you're going to complete main story quests and periodically you'll get new whetstones and better whetstones over time. Question from Darth Vader 7442 asks, how do you use the totems? And the answer to this one is just to equip them to a hotbar for the bonus effects that they can provide. Some totems will increase your armor while some do other various effects. So you're going to acquire the totems and then equip them to the hotbar spaces. Question from Abodino, how do you charge weapons and heal fast? Well, quickly, you can charge your weapons by pausing the game and going straight to your items menu, or you can equip those to hotbar or belt slots in that item menu, allowing you to access them in the overworld. As far as charging your weapons, you're just going to lift them above your head, in which you can have up to 3 charges for your weapons. Some special skills will take multiple charges, so be on the lookout for that whenever you are using the special abilities. Neither Enough asks, how do you get the trumpets? And this one's pretty nice and simple. You just get the trumpets from the shop. You go straight over to your Raw's outpost, go to the shop, and they'll have some trumpets. You can carry up to 3 of these trumpets, making it a little easier for you to use instead of having to constantly go back every time you encounter the giant dead mummy thing. And our last question from Boating Olympia asks, how do you get followers to go away? And Zeph834 said, you select the icon in the overworld and move it over them. them. So if your follower has already appeared, let's say you got the Panther Lady out, she is not in Panther form, she is in her humanoid form, you can simply bring up the same menu that you would to summon that Panther form, but instead of selecting that Panther form, just hover right back over her and select the humanoid version of her and let go. This should make her disappear just like any other follower, allowing you to play the game in solace. Well guys, I really hope you enjoyed these tips for Asgard's Wrath 2. Let me know more of your tips in the following comments below. Remember, I will be making a Rift Edition, a Good, Bad, and Ugly, and a few other videos on this game, so let me know what you think about it. I'd love to hear what you got to say. Don't forget to support us by checking out our sponsor, becoming a channel member, hitting that thanks button, and liking the video. Thanks so much guys, I'll see you in the next one.